Hello YouTube world. Disclaimer to start this video. Apologize for the jumping around, but there's going to be a little bit of a sequencing non sequitur, if that makes any sense, in the order of these videos, and that's because there's certain things that in terms of information are useful at a certain time, and while I can't always get a video made and posted the same week, I do have a few videos that are up that are sort of evergreen topics, and we'll just kind of push those down the line a little bit to try and get more timely videos up for when they matter. Case in point, not much point to a video about de-icing in March when the ice is already broken up, and that's today's topic. I want to talk a little bit about what happens when I'm at the dock in my slip, which you'll see I am here, which may be a bit of a non sequitur until the next video, but anyway, talk a little bit about how I keep Charis from becoming a bug in an ice cube and frozen into her slip. So, valid question. Why am I concerned about Charis freezing solid into the ice in her slip? Well, there's a few reasons for that. The ice in this part of the world doesn't really get thick enough or move enough, particularly in here around the docks, that I'm worried about structural or physical damage, but the ice will take the paint off your waterline quick, and you'll get to spring with pretty much no bottom paint left for the upper foot of your waterline. It can also damage the topside paint. Next issue is that if you've watched my earlier videos about water usage, I use salt water heavily on Charis for wash water. So keeping the seacocks open for pulling in clean salt water and draining sinks is critical, and that's the second reason. Third reason I would list as if the seawater around the boat is kept above the freezing point, about 31 degrees Fahrenheit, it's a lot easier for me to keep the bilge, the freshwater tanks, the freshwater lines and pumps from freezing with just a small amount of heat. And so, and I guess as a final reason, I would say that because Charis is at a fixed dock, she moves toward and away from the dock, and it's essential that I be able to pull her in close to the dock to climb up the ladder and onto the dock. So it's pretty important to maintain a pool of open water around her, and this is a little bit about how I do that. So first choice in keeping your boat ice free, if you can manage it, is to find a spot where you're in a good current flow. And that is pretty much the case where I am here. I'm on the end of a dock that sticks out into this bottleneck current flow under our local bridge. That carries a fair amount of current from the upper harbor. And so there's almost always a stretch of open water that extends into the end of the dock. But when it gets down to temperatures like we're having now, which are approaching 0 Fahrenheit at night, I think last night got down to about 2 or 3 degrees, then even that narrow slot can freeze up pending a breakup based on the sun or wind or an extreme tide. So having this water flow go by your dock is going to do a tremendous amount to keep you ice free, but it's probably not going to do everything, because there does get to be a point where even that channel can ice over and the current just doesn't reach you. De-icer systems come in two basic flavors. There are compressed air systems that blow air through pipes on the bottom of the basin and rely on the bubbles rising from those pipes, small pinholes in the pipes, to carry warmer water from the bottom up to the surface. And then there are the mechanical propeller, electrically driven circulators like the Casco de-icer that I've chosen. Each has advantages and disadvantages, but exposure early on in my career to a project that was up in the Great Lakes region of New York, or Thousand Islands region, I guess I should say, led to discussion with someone up there who basically put me on track toward the mechanical systems for good reason. So the compressed air systems seem to offer advantages of having machinery all above water and just some inexpensive pipe laying on the bottom. However, uh, if you do a internet search of the Joule-Thomson effect, that's essentially the effect where gas expanding from high pressure to low through a nozzle cools. And then you think about the compressed air system that's installed in some of these marinas. What you're doing is you're essentially refrigerating air that's compressed, probably already starting out at a pretty cold temperature if the basin's freezing. You're compressing that air into the pipes and then expanding it through all of these thousands of little nozzles underwater. And as it expands out those nozzles, it cools. So essentially, rather than carrying warm bottom air up to the surface, you're kind of refrigerating that bottom air that you really want to use to thaw out your surface. That disqualified any kind of compressed air system in my mind. And what I chose over 30 years ago, and same unit still functioning, this Casco de-icer's been fantastic, was the propeller mechanical system. Really nothing more than a water circulator driven by an AC electric motor. They come in different sizes. I use the smaller half horsepower size. It's always been adequate to clear my slip, and if there's a neighboring boat, generally this thing angled properly will clear at least 2 boats worth of marina space. So they work very well, and this is the unit that I've chosen. So there's no great science to deploying one of these propeller de-icers, but there are a few potential pitfalls that I'll mention here and a few nuances of the installation that may help yours work better. First thing I would say is that if you're suspending the bucket de-icer, as it were, below the boat, it's very important that the suspension lines extend outboard at a relatively shallow angle. If you hang this thing down vertically without separating the attachment points above the water, then the torque of this spinning propeller can tend to spiral this thing up into a knot. And so having a relatively wide V of separation between your attachment points above the water is the first thing that I would call essential. The next thing is that while there are various ways to use these, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, for a typical slip installation like on Charis here, what I like to do is have the bucket angled at a sort of a diagonal, so it's blowing the bottom water up toward the bow, but also aft along the hull or forward, depending on how you're in your slip. But essentially, having that diagonal is going to clear not just a round hole above the de-icer, but also a sort of a longitudinal space for a pretty good distance, depending on your specific setup. Well, I know it's not always possible. I find the de-icer works best if I lower it to a fixed height above the bottom. And because I'm in about a 5-foot tide range region, that means that I need to find a way to secure the de-icer to the fixed dock, not to the boat that rises and falls with the tide. Certainly it will work if attached to the boat, but the lower you get this toward the bottom, the warmer water it's going to find. And one thing you certainly don't want to do is either have the de-icer go all the way down and rest in the mud, or have the boat come down on top of the de-icer if you've attached it to the dock. So you've got to be a little bit strategic about that. My finding has been that positioning this in a fixed height off the bottom, just forward of the bow of the boat and angled aft and upward, gets the best bang for the buck, the best impact, the best cleared area from the de-icer. So what you'll see on this installation is that I've run the port side securing line up to the dock ladder that I use to get on and off the boat. On the starboard side, not having anything in a convenient location, I ran a sort of tension line between one of the slip pilings and the dock, and the de-icer line on the port starboard side goes up to a loop in that line and then runs back to where I can control it. So there's a certain amount of play that you've got to do here. There's a little give and take. It takes a little time to get these things set up just right and optimally aimed. But once you do, it's well worth the time that it took to do it, because this will reliably create a hole in the water and keep your boat free from ice. On the safety side of the equation here, probably smart to have this unit plugged into a GFCI of some kind. You may be in a marina that already has ground fault protection on all of the slip power pylons. If so, then you're probably good to go. What I tend to do is use an inline GFCI on the extension cord and rely on that to provide a level of shock protection. And also, if you're, say, using a 30 amp shore connection with a 15 amp adapter, you're going to protect your equipment and your cord where the dock circuit breaker would not. So that is basically how we prevent Charis from having the Shackleton endurance experience, getting squashed like a bug in the pack ice, although it's not really pack ice. The astute among you will have noticed the green netting around my slip and underneath my boarding ladder. That'll be the subject of a later video that we'll talk about. Today we see how we keep Charis safe from the ice, and working up a video to explain what this netting does and how it keeps me safe from the ice. Well, that's what we've got for this week. Thanks for stopping by, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, maybe a share, and maybe even subscribe. We'll see you next week.